These sanctuaries aren't so safe after all. This world is a strange one. Having been raised a Christian, I went to church for over a decade of my young life. It was a place where people came to socialize and feel secure in both their minds and bodies. But slowly, I was told stories throughout my time there. Stories about how most of the hauntings that these churchgoers have actually happened at the very church we felt safe in. What does it mean when the sanctuary becomes the hunting ground? Well, let's take a look at 5 allegedly real haunted church horror stories and learn just what kind of evils lurk on the church grounds. But first, you guys really should check out Chilling Tales' new animated horror film series. There are some serious scares waiting for you, with producer David Romero bringing the nightmares to life. So I highly recommend going on over to Chilling Tales True Scary Stories and Creepypasta, or click the link in the description. Also, I've updated the submission form on our website. Now you can attach an image with your story, you can format your text more easily, and I'll be able to publish your stories faster. Just go to darknessprevails.org/submit to share your story today. Thanks. Now, you better have on your Sunday best. Number 1. Midnight Church Ghost. Submitted by Lord Vile 6594. I remember this very well, and I will never forget it. This event terrified me and my best friend. It was a Tuesday on our summer break. Me and my best friend Scott had decided to go to our church to play Xbox in the upstairs youth room. We did this because his parents were on the strict side, and we wanted to get away from them for a while. We set the Xbox and the projector up to play Halo Reach Online. The part of the church we were in was fairly new. It was just recently built and added on to the church. We started playing around 8 o'clock and kept playing until midnight. Everything was perfectly normal and fine up until that moment. That moment when me and Scott heard someone walking down the hallway. We assumed it could have been the youth leader, since he checks up on the church sometimes and lives right across the street. Scott got up and went to the door to meet him. However, when he opened the door, there was nobody there. But we still heard those footsteps. We checked every room down the hallway, thinking maybe that the youth leader knew we were in the church and wanted to play a prank on us for staying up so late. After getting tired of looking, we started to get annoyed. We just went back to playing the game, thinking that eventually our youth leader would come out of hiding to meet us. Half an hour passed, and we were still playing Halo when we heard those footsteps again. This time, however, me and Scott decided to hide in front of the doors, ready to scare our youth leader to death as he opened the doors. The footsteps grew closer and closer, and then finally we heard the door click. But it didn't open. We stayed there waiting, thinking maybe the youth leader was just peering through the window on the door, trying to see if he could see us. Scott bent down and looked underneath the crack of the door, only to see that there was no one behind it. The door clicked again, and then it began to shake violently. This made me and Scott jump back. We stood up. Scott swung the doors open, and still, there was no one there on the other side, and there was no way for someone to have shaken the door and run away that quickly. We would have seen them run into one of the other rooms. This time we searched the entire church, and we couldn't find anything or anyone. After that, we decided to pack our stuff and leave the church. We went back home, calling it a night. The next morning, we asked our youth leader if he had been at the church that night, and he said that he was asleep in bed with his wife at the time. Scott and I looked at each other. Me and Scott went back to the church Thursday night to see if something would happen again. However, nothing did. We have investigated that church more than once around midnight and other times, but still, nothing compared to what happened that night has ever happened again. Number 2. Something Upstairs. Submitted by BIRDIE. The church I grew up attending isn't outwardly creepy or frightening in the least. In fact, it's actually a really nice looking building both inside and out. There is even a cherry tree just outside the doors that adds an image of innocence to the building in the spring. The sanctuary and fellowship hall were always brightly lit, and neither I nor my sisters ever felt particularly uncomfortable in the downstairs sections of the church. The upstairs section, though, was a completely different story. That's where the youth meetings and Sunday school lessons were held. It's also home to the nursery, church offices, and the supply closet. It's a narrow hallway that I always remember being incredibly dimly lit. Even when the lights were on and whenever any of us kids were up there alone, we felt watched. Not to mention it was also cold all the time, which really added to the creepy factor. My family made up the youngest members of this church. Other than a very small handful of other kids who were roughly my age, there wasn't a single person under the age of 20 in that church. So whenever any of us complained about feeling watched, inevitably one of the old women of the church would explain to us that it was just God or Jesus watching over us. But none of us ever believed it. God or Jesus watching over us should never feel as creepy as being upstairs alone felt. Frequently, if I was walking down the hallway, I would feel a tingle right down my spine. That gave me the urge to run and not stop running until I reached the end of the hallway. It would stop when I was through the door and in the safety of the stairway. Even running didn't make me feel better though, because that's when I would feel the distinct sensation of being followed. Not only me, but my two sisters also felt this sensation, as did the pastor's son and the other young church members. They'd also be told that it was God watching over us. My older sister told me the other day that the worst places for her were always in the nursery or the supply closet, while I always felt the most creeped out in the hallway. I don't really have nightmares, but whenever I have spooky dreams, they always take place in that upstairs hallway. I don't have any specific memories of talking to the youth group about how creepy it was to be up there, but I know we all had that feeling because nobody liked being upstairs alone. A specific incident that happened and freaks me out to this day didn't happen to me, but to my twin sister. We've always made the stairway our personal hangout spot, since it was away from the nosy older members of the church, but not quite reaching the creepy upstairs hallway. When our church did Wednesday night potluck dinners, we would take our plates and go sit on the stairs instead of at the tables. We would sit close to the ground level, because being too close to the upstairs was just too creepy. I can't remember why my twin was hanging out there by herself that particular night, but what she said happened gives me the chills. She was sitting by herself at the top of the stairs, outside the door, when it got really cold and she started to hear a very deep and masculine voice, chanting in a different language. When she first told this to me, I thought she might have just heard the pastor speaking Hebrew, since his office is only a few doors down the hallway, and he does have a pretty loud voice. But then she clarified that it was definitely not his voice. She said that the voice had almost a hint of a growl to it, and it sounded nothing like our pastor. We both really freaked out after that, and we started to actively avoid being upstairs alone as much as possible. We changed churches a few years ago, and even though the church we attend now is way older and definitely has a more spooky appearance, I have never felt honestly creeped out anywhere in this building, except for the elevator, but it isn't the same kind of creepy feeling as before. A few months ago, I was walking to my mother, joking mostly about the elevator being scary, when she told me, "This isn't even the church that's supposedly haunted." I took a moment to look at her in confusion before asking her what she meant. My mother then explained to me that supposedly there was a ghost haunting the upstairs hallway of the church we grew up in. I couldn't tell you if I was shocked or not, since I had always felt as though there was something upstairs, something with me whenever I was alone. I'd gotten so used to being told that it was nothing or God, that to hear my own mother more or less confirm my suspicion of something more sinister was a bit surprising. Sometimes we still visit that church for one reason or another, and even though we're not children anymore, My sisters and I still refuse to go upstairs alone. We've never actually seen a ghost or a spirit up there, but we can still feel it, and now we know it's not our imagination, and it's definitely not God watching over us. Number 3. Midnight Ghost at Church. Submitted by Marina in 4 Life 5. It all happened roughly 3 years ago. Before I get started, I'd just like to say I have a lot of stories to tell, and that is because I've experienced a lot. I travel a lot, you see, and I've been all over the world. My name is Marina, and this particular story happened, as I said before, 3 years ago. I was 10 years old, still attending a church. My church had its own Sunday school, and it's basically where young Christian people go to learn about the Bible. One time, Sunday school was being held in the church. Not all the time it was ran in the church because we had places that were purposely meant for a kitchen. We would usually stay next door to that, because Mass was usually held at the same time as Sunday school, so it can give the parents something to do. That's how it originally worked out. Mass was canceled that particular day for some reason. After learning the usual lesson, the teacher told us that there would be a sleepover here later for us. Usually churches wouldn't really have sleepovers, not that I've heard of, because most churches have at least 50 or more students attending. But mine was rather small. We had only about 15 students. So sleepovers were common for our church. Once all the lesson ended, we said our prayers. And after that, the teacher began to hand out a form. It said, "Dear student or carer, we are having a sleepover tonight, beginning from 7:30. Tomorrow you can pick up your child, between the period before noon or bang on noon. We'll be doing many activities and having a lot of fun. Please ensure your child has brought these things listed below." The rest of it is pretty unnecessary to type. I handed my mother the note once I got out of church. She was waiting in her car and watched me walk up to her. Eventually, when we got home, I began to pack all the supplies and things I needed for the sleepover into my maroon and black backpack. Soon after, we headed back to the church around 7:15. My mother dropped me off and I had a lot of fun with the other kids. We did all the activities listed in the note, and at the end of the day, they let us play some video games. I was a girl, so all the girls were crowded around playing some card games, while the boys played video games. We had our fun and realized that it was close to midnight. Our supervising teacher yelled out, "Let's pack up, we need to sleep soon, it's almost midnight." As she said that, we did what we were told and packed up. Midnight came and that's when we finished. The teacher ordered us to line up in pairs and we did so. We followed the teacher who headed for the door that led us to the room we were spending the night in. And as soon as we were inside and the door was shut, we heard it lock. The teacher said, "Dang it," audibly, saying under her breath, "Why did the door lock?" She stopped and thought some more, turning her angry face into a scared one. We kinda got scared too, and we asked her what was wrong. What she replied is one of the most chilling things I've ever heard. First, she counted us, and then she said, "If everyone's in here, then who locked the door?" She explained that she had locked the door before this one, and that there was no one here but us, so who would be on the outside to be able to lock it? This whole thing was creeping me out, and I was praying that it was just some prank the teacher was playing on us. The teacher kept going with the door, trying to open it, trying to shove it open, while the kids stood behind her, kind of scared and huddled. Then a green glow lit up the barely lit room, and we all stared at where it was coming from, and we saw the most horrifying thing we'd ever seen in our lives. It was an old man, though it didn't seem human. He was transparent, with a faint and bleak green coming from him. The teacher, preoccupied with getting the door unlocked and opened, did not notice what was going on, but we all ran to her, panicked and scared, and when we did, the supposed spirit disappeared. Finally, she turned around, and we immediately told her what we had just seen. In response, she told us this story. An old man that had always attended the Mass suddenly collapsed one day and died. Nobody noticed him because at the very moment, the worship music that the priest and deacons were playing overlapped the sound of his fall. He was neither seen nor heard, so nobody noticed, and he unfortunately died there on the spot. She stopped, wondering if she should continue, because she was beginning to scare all of us. She seemed to enjoy it, so she kept going. He has since been haunting the church at all hours, but would only show himself at sharp midnight, and that's what I think you guys just saw. I was horrified, and I didn't talk for the rest of the time there. We never got the door open, so we ended up spending the night inside the church instead of the room reserved for it. I got my night worth rest, but when my mother picked me up, I didn't speak a word of it, because I know she wouldn't believe me. My church was a beautiful place, inside and out, but apparently it has some dark secrets. Be careful about your surroundings, and make sure you always believe in what your gut tells you. Number 4. Church Man. Submitted by MEFOXGAMING. This story took place a few years ago when I was about 11. And just so you know, my mother used to have a Christian friend who threw a party that my family was invited to. My town is well known for being haunted, and the church the party was at is next to a cemetery. My sister also had experiences with this thing before. Once it was in her room, and she says it's the same spirit as the one at the church. Anyway, after arriving at church one day, my mom told my siblings and I to go play outside. We agreed, and I ran outside where the other children were playing hide and seek, even though it was beginning to get dark. After running around for a while, my sister and I found a hiding place to share. We didn't stay there for long though. After about 5 minutes of hiding, we got bored and impatient, so we ran out into the open. Nothing was different. There were still children running around aimlessly, but there was someone else in the group. I looked at my sister before running off and laughing. I turned around to look behind me, only to see this newest player chasing after me. I laughed it off and kept running, not really thinking more of it, but I did keep looking behind me, and I noticed that this was not a kid. Not only that, this person was all black, not one splash of another color on his body. I could see no details on him whatsoever, no face, no eyes, and I could feel him intensely staring at me. I remember even my brother and sister recall seeing him playing with us, and seeing something was very off about him. We were eventually called in for tea, and this figure just stood in the corner of the church, looking at everyone, and he never moved. And I mean, he didn't move at all. No breathing, no fidgeting, nothing. Honestly, I was very creeped out. Once we were done with our little break, we went back outside to play yet another game, and I was hesitant. This figure was just watching us all. I recall hiding next to the church, alone. I kept looking around, and it wasn't until then that I really felt scared of this man. He walked over to me, not a single sound coming from his footsteps, and though I couldn't see it, I could hear him breathing heavy and slow. I remember my heart racing and pounding. I realized that this was not someone playing a game with us. In fact, even before the man could get 5 meters closer to me, I sped off towards my parents. I quickly found them in a state of panic. Calming down a bit, I looked over towards the area I had sped off from. I could see the man standing there, staring right at me. He was exactly where I had been. My heart sank and I froze. I know people say that time freezes when you're scared half to death, but that's not the way it happened for me. In fact, time sped up. I couldn't stop staring at this guy, and I couldn't have been more ready to get away from him. When we were leaving the party, I saw him, staring right at the car, walking slowly towards us before stopping at the exit of the church. Now, I know people will never believe something like this, and some will chalk it up to my imagination, but I remember him grabbing my arm before. I could feel his cold hands on me before I yanked away from his grip. My parents never believed me either, but I understand that from my dad. He's never been much of a believer in the paranormal and supernatural stuff. I haven't talked much about it since. My sister and I think it was a shadow man, but I'm not sure they can even touch you. I used to think it was some kind of creep preying on children. Whatever he or it was, I haven't seen him since, and I really don't want to. but I will never forget the empty face that stared at me for quite some time that night. And number 5. I saw something evil in my church. Submitted by Emily. When I was a little girl, my parents, my siblings, and I practically lived at our church. My parents did a lot of volunteer work, and since they homeschooled us, we were there every week, multiple times every week. It wasn't boring since the church had a huge gym and multiple classrooms for Sunday school, with large dry erase boards that I loved to color on. There was also another homeschooled family who went to and lived right next to the church, so they were there just as often as we were. I always spent my time with the other homeschooled girl my age. Her name was Allie. Allie and I were both around the ages of 10 or 12, and we were both artistic, so we spent a majority of our time in one of the classrooms, coloring and drawing on the dry erase boards. There was a session of Sunday school and there were arts and crafts along the wall with the board on it. The craft the children made were fish made out of CDs with the reflective sides facing us. I left to go to the bathroom down the hall. I never felt anything odd or off in any way. Now, I have had a lot of unexplainable things happen to me as a child, and I could always feel a large amount of anxiety before any of these strange things would happen. But I felt nothing. That is, until I stepped back into that room. I went completely numb to my surroundings and only focused on one thing. On the fish CD hanging closest to Allie. She stood with her back facing me. I saw the most horrific thing that my young mind could barely fathom. There, on the top half of the disc, was the top half of someone's face. All I could see of it was from the top of the nose up. They were bald, with light purple and blue skin that looked so tight on this thing's face that it looked like it would tear away at any second. Its eyes were staring right into mine through the reflection, and all I could do in return was stare back. Its eyes, they were so angry, angrier than I've ever seen in my life. There was nothing special about the eyes. They weren't black or red or glowing. They were normal size and a shade of brown. The eyes were just angry and piercing into mine. I couldn't look away. I felt as though if I did look away, this thing would be freed from the reflection. It felt like time stopped, and I was in a staring contest with something that made no sense. "Are you okay, Emily?" I glanced away for 1 second to see Allie looking at me, worried that I had just been standing there without moving for about a whole minute. I quickly glanced back to the CD, and now nothing was in the reflection. I nodded and just went back to coloring with my friend like nothing ever happened. I never saw that or anything like it ever again, and I'm almost 20 now, and I've only started to talk about that experience 2 years ago with my family and close friends. When I told my younger brother, Saul, about it, he told me that our oldest brother, Liam, had an experience there too. They were playing near the basement. There was nothing strange about the basement. It was used as another classroom and a walkway as the only way to get to the actual church from that part of the building. While my brothers were playing, Saul ran and hid in the opposite direction of the basement when Liam wasn't looking. Saul then watched from his little hiding area as Liam yelled out something and ran down the ramp to the basement. He waited for Liam to come looking for him, but several minutes passed by, and then he heard him scream. Liam ran back up the ramp, screaming all the way, and he tripped over his own feet onto the floor. Saul, thinking it was some part of the game, came over to him. He quickly realized that this was not part of the game anymore when he saw that Liam, who never showed one bit of negative emotion to us, was crying hysterically. It took Saul months to get an explanation from Liam. He finally said that while they were playing, he swore that he saw Saul running down into the basement, and when he followed and found nothing there, he was filled with a sense of dread and fear that he had never experienced and has never felt since then. It could not have been any other kid who frequented the building along with us. He swore up and down that it was the back of our little brother that he saw running into the basement, right down to the same clothes he was wearing. During both of these experiences, it was only us and our mom in the building at the time. We have no explanations as to how these things can be explained rationally. We no longer go to that church for other reasons, but still hear about weird things going on there. Even our pastor at the time would say, matter-of-factly, that there are spirits in the building. Whatever was or still is there, I pray that it finds peace and it stops terrorizing the children. When Sunday morning rolls around, you might want to hesitate this time about throwing on your dress clothes and your crucifix. I mean, if the same demonic terrors can get to you at the very place you thought you were safe, where can you really go? Is there really any escape from the horrors of this world? Or do we all just have to wait until we become the next victim? Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to check out our new and improved submission form to submit your story today at darknessprevails.org/submit. Thanks.